In this video, I'm going to discuss users functions in structured programming. First one is what is a function? Actually, a function is a group of statements that together perform a particular task or we call specific task. A function can also be referred as a method or subroutine or a procedure, right? Sometimes we call this method, this is subroutine. So all are referred a function, right? Every C program has at least one function, all right? So already we know that is a main function or main method. So dividing a complex problem into a small chunks makes our program easy to understand and reuse, right? So there can be a big problem, so we can divide that big problem into the manageable components, right? So we call those sub methods or sub functions. So you can divide up your code into separate functions such that each function perform a specific task. All right, so you can divide your program into the small functions. Each of functions perform a specific task. So when you solve a complex problem, something like this, right? So we can divide that problem into smaller parts. Then we can manage those parts separately, and then we can get a solution for those sub parts, and then by uh, together those results or those solutions, we can have a solution for a main problem. All right, so I'll give you an example. All right, so assume, so this is my question. All right, so this is the question that we have to solve, or this is the problem that we have to solve. All right, so we have to find a plus b, and then we have to divide, which is from the a minus b, or the difference between a minus b, or a and b, right? So what we can do, we can divide this main problem into sub problems. All right. So let's take. So we can take a plus b as a one component, a minus b as another component. So we call p equal a plus b, and then we can take q equal a minus b. All right. Then we can have a final solution by p divided by q, right? So likewise, if you have a problem, that problem can be divided into the manageable components, all right? Then we can solve those sub-components or the sub-problems. Then by adding together those results or the solution, we can have a solution for the main problem, right? Okay, so let's see how to define a function. All right. So first of all, we have to mention the return type of the function. What is the return type? So probably there is a data type, right? So most of the time there is data type, and then name of the function, and then within a round bracket we can have a parameter list. All right. Then we can define the body of the function, or we call a block of the function. All right. So we know return type. Return type is the data type of the value the function returns. Right. So if there is a return value from that function, we have to define the data type of that value. Right. So if there is no value to return, usually we call return type is void. Right. So return type of the function without returning a value is void. Right. And then next one is the function name, or we call function identifier. So this is the name of the function. The function name and the parameter list together we call the function signature. Usually name of the function along with the parameter list we label that is the signature of the function. And then what are the parameters? So when a function is invoked or when we call to that function, we have to pass values to the parameters. We have to pass relevant values to those parameters. All right. So this value is referred to as actual parameter or arguments. So usually we call those are parameters or arguments, right? The parameter list refer to the type, order, and the number of the parameter of the function. So for example, if you have a function having two parameters, which are say integer and double in data type, you have to pass integer and double into the order, right? So we can't pass. So if it is if in parameter list, if it is an integer and double, we can't pass double and integer order. So we have to follow the order in the function definition. So I'll give the examples in programming demonstrations. All right, and the parameters are optional. So that is a parameter functions may contain no parameter. So in some functions there is no parameters. All right. So next one is the function body or the function implementation, right? So this is the function body contains the collection of statements that define what the function does, right? So in function implementation, we have to define a set of statements, right? Okay, and then types of functions. So there are two types of functions in C programming, all right? The first one is standard library functions, which are already used in our programming, and the next one is user defined functions, right? So now we know how to define functions, right? So first one is standard library functions. So the standard library functions are built-in functions in C programming, right? So these functions are defined in header files, right? So that means if you want to use a particular standard library function, we have to import the relevant header file, all right? So those are the files which contain the standard library functions. So for example, the printf function is a standard library function, right? So which is defined to send formatted output to the screen, right? So if you want to display a message, or if you want to display a value of particular variable, so we can use printf functions. But if you use printf functions, we have to import standard input output header file or stdio header file, right? So we have to import, or we call that include this header file in our program. And yeah, hence to use the printf function, we need to include stdio.h header file by using this particular statement. All right, so we know this. So this is another example, sqrt function, square root functions, which is used to calculate square root of a particular number. So this function is defined within a math.h header file or math header file. So if you want to use sqrt function or square root function in our program, we have to include this header file in our program, right? So that's about the standard library functions. So actually we have already used these standard library functions in our programming, right? So even printf or scanf, right? So those are already used. And next one is user-defined functions, right? So what is user-defined functions? The functions created by the user are known as user-defined functions. So that means in addition to the standard library function or built-in functions, the program or users can define functions, right? So let's see how to defining a function, right? So we know the syntax for defining functions. So this is example for user-defined functions. So in here we are going to define functions which take two parameters, say number1 or num1 and num2, or sorry, number1 or number2, and returns the total of those numbers. All right. So in here, so this is how we define the function. So actually in here, this function return the total of the numbers. All right. So assume that number1 and number2 are integer in data type. So the value is total, that is also in the integer data type. So in here, I specify the return type is integer, and this is my function name or the identifier add numbers. So usually we have to use meaningful name for the function name or as a function identifier, and then these are the parameters. They take two parameters, number one and number two, both are in integer data type, right? So within the function implementation, first of all, I have to define the variable called total, because in here I am going to return the total, which is in integer data type, and then I implement the operation, and then this is the operation statement, number one plus number two assigned to the variable total, right? And then actually this should be total, right? This should be total. Then we can return the results. The return result is total. Then we can return the total, right? So total is in integer, right? So that's why I put return type as an integer, right? So so this is user defined function. So how can we use this user defined function in our main program? Let's see. So calling a function, how to call the define function, right? So control of the program is transferred to the user defined function by calling it. So by calling to the user defined function, we can transfer the control of the program to the user defined function, right? So this is the syntax. So within the main program, so by using the function name along with the relevant argument list, we can call to the function. So when you pass the arguments, we have to follow the correct order, right? Correct order. If there are two parameters, we have to pass two parameters. So and then we have to follow the order. So first one is integer, and then let's see, let's assume, right? So first parameter is integer, and then next one is double. If so, we have to pass that particular order, right? So we have to follow that particular order when you follow when you pass the values, right? So I'll demonstrate in examples, right? So in our example, we can call to the add numbers function like this: add numbers n1 and n2. So in here there is no problem because both are integer data type, right? So we have to pass two parameters, since the add numbers function defined with two parameters, right? So we can include this statement inside the main function, right? So by following those syntax, right? So we can easily call to the user defined function, and then return statement, right? Actually, the return statement terminate the execution of the function and return a value to the calling functions. All right. So return statement terminate the execution of the function and returns the results or the value to the calling functions. Right. The program control is transferred to the calling function after the return statement, right? And the type of the value returned from the function and the return type specified in the function definition, right? And then it should be match, right? So I explained that rule in earlier, right? So we have to specify the data type of the returning value, right? As a return data type. Okay. So how user-defined functions works? Let's see. I'll take the same example. So in here I define function say add numbers, right? So and then return type is integer, and then in here I take two parameters say num1 and num2, and then I define the variable called total, and then get the summation of num1 and num2, and then assign to the value total, variable total, and then return the variable total, actually return the value of total. So that is the my function. And then inside the main method, how can we call to this add numbers function? So for the time being, I assign 10 as the 10 assigned to the variable n1 and 20 assigned to the variable n2, and then I call to the add numbers function by passing n1 and n2 as arguments, right? So these are called arguments. So since there are two parameters in add numbers function, we have to pass two arguments when you call it, right? And then so this n1 goes to num1 and n2 goes to num2, right? And then here take the summation n1 and n2 and then assign to the variable total and then return it. So when you return the value total, that is assigned to the variable sum. Then in here I print n1, n2 and the variable sum, right? So that's about my program. So let's see how it is executed, right? The execution of the C program begin from the main function, right? So this is the function which initiate our program, or this is the uh, initiating point, or the execution of the C program begin from the main function. So when the compiler encounter add numbers function, so in here, so when you call to the add numbers function, right? So in here I have to pass n1 and n2 because in our function definition there are two parameters. Then n1 assigned to the number 1, n2 assigned to the number 2. Then the compiler start executing the code inside the num1 and num2. That is here create variable called total and then take the summation of n1 and n2 assigned to the variable total and return the total. The control of the program jump back to the main function once code inside the function definition is executed. All right. So after the execution of this body of the defined function, then the total, the value of total return to the add numbers, the calling point, and then this total return to here, and then that value assigned to the variable sum. Then they print n1, n2, and the variable sum. Right. So that is the execution of a user-defined function. So that's how executing user-defined function, right? Okay, I think before go to the next one, let's see how to code this function in our TUC++ software. Okay, I'll take new program and then I'll include say standard input output data file. All right. First of all, I define my function. So return type of my function is integer and name of my function is say add numbers, and then I need two parameters, say integer say num1 and integer num2, and then this is my block of function. So I create a variable called total and then take the summation of n1 sorry num1 and num2 and then assign to the variable called total, right? And then return the value of total. And within the main method, so in here I declare two variables, say int n1, so then I assign 10 as n1, and then I declare variable n2, so 20 assigned to the n2, and then now I am going to call add numbers function, add numbers, sorry, numbers, okay, numbers. Then I have to pass two parameters since here two parameters are required. So actually here we use the word called argument n1 and n2. So in here it doesn't matter because here the two parameters are integer data type. So both n1 and n2 are integer. Then it doesn't matter n1 comma n2 or n2 comma n1. In this case order is not important because all are integer in data type. And then in here they return the value total, then the total return to here, then there should be a variable to take that value, then I declare variable called say sum, or before this I can declare variable called sum and then I can use that variable in here. Yeah, that's better. And then we can print the value of n1, n2 and sum. So since there are three integers, I can format say d and plus d equal d. So like this. So since there are three variables, so I can print those variable like this, right? So first one is say n1, second one is n2, then the answer is sum. Okay. Okay, then I compile this, right? So I'm going to save this one as a separate folder called save functions. So this is my first function. So therefore I use save function 1.c. Okay, and then I run this. Okay, then here we can have noise output. 10 plus 20 is 30. So n1 is 10, n2 is 20, and then here n1 assigned to num1, n2 assigned to num2, and then take the summation and return the total. Okay, that's it. All right. Okay. Then I changed this one a little bit. So I save the same source code, say function 2.c. If you want, you can take this n1 and n2 as a user inputs. User inputs. So how can we take the user input? So I define say int n1 comma n2, and then I'll take user inputs. Right now you know how to input values. Enter say number 1. Right? Say scanf. So within the scanf function, I take integer n% say n1, right? And then I take the same source code, same code for taking next input, enter number 2, and then assign to the n2. Okay, same source code with 2 user inputs. Take n1 number 1, take n2 the number 2, and compile this. Sorry, there should be a semicolon. Compile this and execute. Enter number 1 and say enter 50, say enter 70. Then we can have a summation of 50 plus 70. All right. So likewise, without hard coding those values, we can take as a user inputs. Right. Okay. So that's about the defining functions. Right. So assume if someone define a function something like this, say, so this is not in node, so I, yeah, so assume there's a function which take 3 parameters, say num3. So if I compile this, now you can see, right? So in here the function requires 3 parameters, but when you call to the function, here I pass only 2 parameters. So this is incorrect. This is incorrect. So in here we have to pass 3 parameters. We have to pass 3 parameters since this function definition is in function definitions. So inside the parameter list, so there are 3 parameters. So when you call it, we have to pass 3 arguments. All right. So for the time being, in here there are 2 parameters. And then the next one is so no need to return the total, the value of total. So instead of that, we can print uh, the answer in here. All right. So for example, in here, actually, in here we can print the num1, num2, and the total. That means here we can follow the same format. All right. So instead of pass the uh, uh, total, the value of total, we can print this num1, num2, and total inside the function. So in here there is no return value. So in that case, in here the return type is void. So usually we use void as a return type. So since there is no value to return, so in this case, no need to take the return value and print it. So within the main function, so just we called the function, then inside the function they take the total and then print the value. Right. So I save this one and compile and run this. So again, here we can have a same results. Right. Okay. And then next one, is, so in here I save the same function as say function 4.c, and then so if you first say another character, so in here say char grade, or say any character a, something like this. So in here we can pass a character, so just say any character. So for example, right, so let's see s, so in here we can pass character, right? It doesn't matter. So when you pass any character, so it is working nicely. But if you pass, so in here in function definition, so this is the order: first one integer, the second one integer, the third one is character. So here I follow the same order: first one integer, second one integer, the third one character. But if you pass something like this: first one integer, second one character, the third one is integer again, now this order is not matching to the function coding. In that case, so in here, so I compile this and I pass the value. I pass 10, say 20. Now you can see this is incorrect results. This is incorrect results because the second one take say s as a character, then actually they take the what you call that unique, or what you call that ASCII code of the characters. So this is incorrect. This is incorrect. I input num1 as 10, num2 as 20, but here when you pass the second one, here I pass second one as a character. So this is incorrect. That means we have to follow the same model which are defining in function definition. Okay. So that's about the basic functions uh, usage in C programming. So let's see some advanced options in next video. Okay, thank you very much. So you have to practice this one, then only we can have a nice idea or the correct idea about the functions. Okay, thank you very much.